Put your hands where I can see them. Boy, don't make me repeat myself." The officer's voice cracked through the calm of Grant Park like thunder. People turned, startled. The autumn air was quiet just a moment ago. Now, it carried the chill of authority and fear. Before we get into this story, where are you watching from? Drop your city below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe justice still matters, because what happened in Chicago will make you question everything. It started like any other Friday evening. The sun hung low over Lake Michigan, bathing Grant Park in gold. Families strolled along the paths, joggers passed by, and the distant hum of traffic blended with laughter. Jamal Thompson, 38 years old, sat on a weathered bench near the fountain. He looked like any other man enjoying a late afternoon breeze, but under the calm, he was on a mission. Beneath his casual jacket hid the quiet vigilance of an FBI agent tracking a corruption suspect. His earpiece whispered updates every few minutes, short, coded, controlled. His eyes moved from one face to another, steady but unassuming, a few yards away. Officer Derek Sullivan drove past in his patrol car. 15 years on the force had carved lines of suspicion deep into his face. To him, every corner held a threat, every stranger a story that didn't fit right. And today, something about the man on the bench unsettled him. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe it was the skin color. Or maybe, deep down, it was the ghost of his father's murder, killed years ago in a robbery gone wrong. The shooter's black men whose faces still haunted Derek's sleep. That old wound, never healed, whispered in his ear as he parked and stepped out. "Hey!" he barked, walking toward Jamal with heavy boots crunching on fallen leaves. "You fit the description of a suspect we're looking for. Tall black male, mid-30s, gray jacket." His tone wasn't curious. It was accusatory, sharp like a blade. Jamal looked up, calm but wary. "I'm just sitting here, officer," he said quietly. "Can I ask what this is about?" Derek's hand hovered near his holster. "Show me some ID." Jamal sighed. He had lived this moment before, too many times in different forms. The question wasn't if it would happen, but when. Still, part of him wanted to test the man, to see how far prejudice would reach when faced with calm defiance. "I don't think I've done anything wrong," Jamal replied. "Am I being detained?" Those words, the calm challenge, ignited something in Derek. His face tightened. The tension that had been simmering for years boiled over in a heartbeat. "You think you can talk back to me?" he growled, grabbing Jamal's arm. The crowd around them began to notice. Phones lifted, cameras focused. Jamal stood without resistance, eyes steady. "I'm asking for respect, officer," he said softly. But respect was the one thing Derek had long forgotten how to give. With a force that startled even himself, he shoved Jamal onto the grass. "Get down! Hands behind your back!" The cuffs clicked around Jamal's wrists, cold and tight. Lisa Patel, a 30-year-old software engineer jogging nearby, froze mid-step. Her instinct told her something was off. She pulled out her phone and began recording. "He didn't do anything," someone shouted from the crowd. Derek ignored them. "Stay back," he barked, his voice trembling with authority and buried fear. As Jamal knelt on the ground, his mind flashed back to another night years ago. His brother, Marcus, unarmed, shot by police during a mistaken raid. He could still hear his mother's scream echoing through time. He had joined the FBI not out of ambition, but because he promised himself he'd never let injustice go unchecked again. Yet here he was, in cuffs, under the same sky, replaying a nightmare he thought he'd escaped. "Officer," Jamal said calmly, his voice low, "you're making a mistake." Derek tightened the cuffs. "The only mistake is thinking I won't do my job." The crowd grew louder, Some shouted for Derek's badge number. Others begged him to stop. Robert Hayes, a retired white cop walking his dog nearby, stood watching. His instincts told him to back his fellow officer. But something about the scene gnawed at him. The unnecessary aggression, the look in Jamal's eyes, the way fear turned into quiet dignity. Lisa's camera caught every second. The push, the tone, the hand gripping too tightly. Her video would soon travel faster than any report, faster than any denial. Within hours, it would be on every phone in the city, carrying the caption, "Man wrongfully arrested in Grant Park." Derek pulled Jamal to his feet and guided him toward the patrol car. The onlookers parted, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. A few muttered prayers. A child asked his mother why the man was being arrested. No one had an answer. The park's serenity had shattered into silence, broken only by the sound of sirens approaching in the distance, inside the patrol car. Jamal stared out the window. The reflection of flashing lights danced on his face. His wrists throbbed, but he stayed silent. Derek sat in the driver's seat, breathing heavily, one hand gripping the wheel. For a brief moment, he glanced at Jamal through the rearview mirror. What he saw wasn't defiance. It was composure, control. That unnerved him more than any threat could. "Where were you headed?" Derek asked, voice low but harsh. "Home," Jamal answered. "To my wife and daughter." That silence that followed was heavier than the cuffs. Derek's jaw tightened. He turned on the siren and drove off. Michigan Avenue lit up around them, neon lights reflecting off wet pavement, people watching as the patrol car passed. To the crowd, it was just another arrest. To Jamal, it was the beginning of something much bigger. As the car disappeared into the city's glow, Lisa looked down at her phone. The video had already reached thousands of views in minutes. Comments flooded in. Outrage, disbelief, anger. Some people wrote prayers, others wrote curses, and somewhere across town, a captain named Elena Ramirez would soon see that same clip, recognizing the man in cuffs not as a suspect, but as one of her own. In that moment, beneath the city lights, two lives had collided, one driven by pain and bias, the other by purpose and restraint. Neither man knew it yet, but this single encounter would unravel an entire web of corruption, expose hidden truths, and force a city to face itself. That night, the city didn't sleep. It whispered, phones buzzed, screens glowed, hearts stirred. And for Jamal Thompson, this was not just another mission. It was the reckoning his soul had waited for since the day his brother died. Beneath those cold blue lights, justice had just begun to awaken. The patrol car rolled through downtown Chicago, its red and blue lights reflecting against the glass towers that lined Michigan Avenue. Inside, silence sat heavy between them. Jamal stared through the window, watching the city blur past, each intersection glowing with restless light. The handcuffs dug into his wrists, cold and sharp, a cruel echo of the very system he had sworn to uphold. Derek drove with clenched hands and a storm behind his eyes. The steering wheel became an anchor, his grip on control, his proof that he was still the one in charge. But deep down, something twisted in his gut. This man in the back seat didn't act like a criminal. He spoke calmly, looked straight ahead, not once begging, not once angry. That composure, it unnerved Derek more than guilt ever could. Still, pride kept him silent. As they neared the downtown precinct, the streets grew louder, horns blared, neon signs flickered, and protesters' voices carried faintly from blocks away. Derek ignored them, focusing on the rhythm of the siren. He parked near the side entrance, stepping out to pull Jamal from the back seat. The moment their eyes met, Jamal's calm cut through the tension like glass. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "One you won't be able to hide for long." Derek didn't answer. He just led him inside. shoving open the metal door. The precinct was chaos in motion. Phones rang, radios crackled, the scent of coffee and disinfectant hung in the air. Officers moved fast, papers in hand, conversations colliding in fragments. Domestic call on Madison. Missing suspect. Body cam upload. Amid the noise, Officer Mike Jenkins stood behind the booking counter, his youthful face worn by the exhaustion of double shifts and the quiet burden of fatherhood. When he saw Jamal, something inside him froze. Recognition flickered in his eyes. He'd seen that face before. Weeks earlier, at an interagency briefing, the FBI had sent a representative to coordinate an anti-corruption task force. That representative was Jamal Thompson. For a split second, Mike's heart skipped. He looked from Jamal to Derek, then back again. He opened his mouth, but words failed. If he spoke up, it could cost him his career. He had 2 kids at home, one sick with asthma. A suspension meant no insurance, so he swallowed his conscience and kept his head down. "Name?" he asked quietly, typing into the system as protocol demanded. Jamal held his gaze. "You already know who I am," he said, voice steady. Mike flinched, looking away. "We'll get this cleared up," he muttered, avoiding Derek's stare, from her glass-walled office above the main floor. Captain Elena Ramirez observed the commotion. At 42, she carried authority like a quiet weight, earned, not demanded. Her hair was tied back neatly, her desk spotless, the city skyline glinting behind her. She'd seen her share of bad calls, but something about this one felt wrong. When Derek appeared in her doorway, proud and defensive, leading a man in cuffs, her instincts sharpened. "What's this?" she asked, her tone measured. "Suspect from the park," Derek said. "Matches the description." Elena's eyes flicked to Jamal. Recognition hit her like a jolt. She knew him, not personally, but professionally. He was the FBI liaison assigned to her precinct's audit last year. She couldn't say it aloud. Not yet. Not in front of Derek. "Take the cuffs off," she ordered. Derek frowned. "Captain, this guy. Now, officer." Her tone cut him off clean. Derek hesitated but obeyed, unlocking the cuffs with a metallic click that seemed louder than it should have been. Jamal rubbed his wrists, his expression unreadable. Once Derek stepped out, Elena closed the door. "Agent Thompson," she said under her breath. "What in God's name happened?" Jamal leaned forward slightly. "I was running surveillance in Grant Park. I can't go into details, but my target's connected to your precinct's corruption unit. He intercepted my suspect list this morning. I needed to stay low." Elena's pulse quickened. "And Derek arrested you during the operation?" "Correct, on the basis of being a tall black man in a jacket." She exhaled sharply, looking toward the blinds where Derek's shadow moved across the hall. "Do you want to press this immediately?" Jamal shook his head. "Not yet. If you open a file tonight, he'll know who I am before I can finish my investigation. Keep it quiet. For now." Elena nodded slowly, the weight of both command and conscience pressing down on her shoulders. "You realize if this blows up, it could bury half this department." Jamal's voice was calm but cold. "Maybe that's what needs to happen." Outside, Derek paced near the vending machine, anger boiling under his skin. He pulled out his phone and dialed home. Amanda answered, her tone weary. "Derek, it's late." "You wouldn't believe the day I've had," he started, rubbing his temple. "Another thug pretending he's innocent. I had to drag him in myself." There was a long silence. "Derek," she said finally, "you've got to stop talking like that. You don't know these people. You assume the worst every time." He clenched his jaw. "You don't understand what I see out here. I understand enough to know you're becoming someone I don't recognize," she whispered. He didn't respond. The line went dead. back in the office. Elena handed Jamal a glass of water. "You'll need to keep a low profile until I sort this out," she said. "I'll log the arrest under review. No public record yet." Jamal nodded. "And the officer? He'll stay on temporary duty. I need more evidence before suspension." Jamal's gaze darkened. "You'll get it." Downstairs, Mike sat at his desk, staring at the monitor. His hands trembled slightly as he typed. Every part of him wanted to do the right thing. To walk upstairs and tell the captain that the man they'd just booked was an FBI agent. But fear was a heavy chain. He thought about his daughter's inhaler, his overdue bills, the promise he made to his wife that he wouldn't cause trouble. He whispered under his breath, "God forgive me," and hit save. As midnight approached, the precinct grew quieter. Jamal was escorted to a holding room, not a cell, but not freedom either. He sat in the dim light, his thoughts circling like restless crows. He had survived war, interrogation, and the slow grind of bureaucracy. But this, the humiliation of being profiled, arrested by a man whose bias burned like an old wound, cut deeper than he expected. Outside, Elena reviewed the day's reports, rubbing her temples. A knock came at her door. Detective Sarah Klein stepped in, tired, meticulous, her eyes sharp as always. "Heard there was an arrest at Grant Park," she said. "Anything I should know?" Elena hesitated, then handed her the brief. "Keep this between us. I want a second set of eyes on the officer's record." Sarah skimmed through it, her expression tightening. "Sullivan's got history," she murmured. "2 complaints for excessive force, 1 for racial profiling, all dismissed." Elena's face hardened. "Then maybe it's time someone stopped dismissing them." Meanwhile, in his apartment across town, Derek poured himself a drink. The TV flickered with the late news. His own reflection in the dark window looked older, meaner. He told himself he was doing his job, protecting his city. But somewhere deep inside, a crack had begun to form, back in the precinct. Jamal closed his eyes. He thought of his daughter's laugh, his wife's voice, his brother's last breath. He made a silent promise. This wouldn't end in silence. The system had just arrested one of its own. And soon. The truth behind those walls would come crashing out for the world to see. That night, under the hum of fluorescent lights and the weight of unspoken truths, the city of Chicago kept turning. But for those inside the precinct, something fundamental had shifted. A line had been crossed, and justice, quiet, patient, and relentless, had begun to stir. By dawn, Chicago was already awake, and so was the outrage. The video that Lisa Patel posted from Grant Park. Just a few shaky seconds of a black man slammed into the grass by a white officer, had exploded overnight. 12 hours, 3 million views, 100,000 comments. The caption read simply, "He said he did nothing wrong." That was all it took. News outlets ran the clip on repeat, anchors speaking in tones of shock and restraint, while social media flooded with anger. But for the people watching, especially those who'd lived their own versions of that moment, it wasn't just a video, it was a wound reopening. By the time Officer Derek Sullivan stepped into the precinct that morning, he already knew. His phone had been vibrating since 6 a.m., messages from colleagues, reporters, even his wife. He hadn't replied to any of them. As he walked through the main hall, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes followed him. The words, "that video," hung in the air like smoke. Officer Mike Jenkins sat stiffly at his desk, unable to look up. Detective Sarah Klein stood by the coffee machine, her brow furrowed as she replayed the clip for the 5th time. She'd seen countless arrests in her 15 years on the job. But this one? It looked wrong from the first second. Too fast, too forceful, too familiar. "Morning," Derek muttered, pretending not to notice. Captain Elena Ramirez watched him from her office window, her jaw tightening. She had managed to keep Jamal's identity quiet overnight. But now, that secret was one spark away from exposure. The city was watching, demanding answers. She motioned for Sarah to come in. "Close the door," Elena said. "We've got a storm coming." Sarah sat down, placing her tablet on the desk. "I've been reviewing Derek's past records," she began. "There's a pattern. 5 citizen complaints, 3 for unnecessary force, 2 for bias, all cleared by internal review. But the body cam timestamps don't match the reports. Someone's been covering for him." Elena's expression darkened. "And you think Chief Grant signed off on it?" Sarah hesitated. "It looks that way." Elena leaned back, exhaling sharply. "If that's true, we're sitting on a landmine. The FBI's been looking into this department already. If they find out one of their agents was wrongfully arrested here, this precinct's finished." Across town, Jamal sat in his apartment, freshly released but still reeling. The video was everywhere, on phones, on TV, on the news ticker running beneath morning broadcasts. He hadn't told the Bureau yet. The fewer people who knew, the better. But as he watched his own face on the screen, calm, restrained, dignified. While Derek's aggression replayed frame by frame, he felt both anger and opportunity. He opened his encrypted line and called Agent Carla Ruiz. "You've seen it?" he asked. Carla's voice came steady. "Everyone's seen it. And Jamal. There's something else. I ran the officer's name through our internal cross-check. Derek Sullivan's popped up in the Corruption Task Force files. He's connected through Sergeant Dale Norris, one of the men we've been tracking for evidence tampering and money laundering." Jamal's tone hardened. "You're saying the man who arrested me is part of the network?" Carla paused. "Not directly on payroll, but he's been protected. Norris covered his reports. Complaints that should have stuck disappeared. Grant signed off on them." Jamal stared at the screen, the city skyline reflecting off his glasses. "Then this isn't just about me," he said quietly. "It's about everyone they've buried." Meanwhile, back at the precinct, tension spread like wildfire. Derek sat at his desk pretending to work, but the whispers were constant. Mike could hear his name in every hallway. He tried to focus on his paperwork, but the guilt was heavy. He knew Jamal was FBI. He knew the arrest was wrong. But fear of losing his job, his benefits, his family's security kept him silent. Across the room, Derek's phone buzzed again. He picked it up, expecting Amanda. Instead, it was an unknown number, hundreds of messages flooding in. "Racist! You should be fired! We saw what you did!" His stomach twisted. In the captain's office, Elena stared out the window as protesters began gathering outside. It started small, 20 people, then 50, then hundreds. Signs lifted into the cold air. Shouts echoed against the walls of the precinct. Sarah entered with new evidence, printouts of archived complaint files, all signed by Chief Thomas Grant. "He's been protecting Sullivan for years," Sarah said quietly. "These complaints never even made it to IA." Elena's jaw set. "Make copies. Lock the originals in my cabinet." Meanwhile, Lisa Patel sat in her small apartment, her phone buzzing non-stop. Reporters wanted interviews. Her boss called, asking her to take the post down, and her parents begged her to stop. "Lisa, please," her mother said on the phone. "You don't know what kind of people you're dealing with." Lisa looked at the frozen frame of Jamal's arrest on her screen. "If I take it down, it's like saying it didn't happen," she said softly. "And it did happen. I was there." A few miles away, Robert Hayes, the retired cop who witnessed it all, sat at his kitchen table, staring at the same video. He'd spent 3 decades defending men like Derek, but what he saw now, the anger, the unnecessary violence, didn't look like law enforcement. It looked like fear hiding behind a badge. He took a deep breath and reached for the phone. "Captain Ramirez," he said when she answered. "This is Hayes. I was at Grant Park. I saw what your officer did. If you need a witness, I'll testify." By evening, the city was boiling. The streets around the precinct were jammed with people holding candles, chanting for justice. Officers formed a line, shields up, faces hard, glass shattered from a nearby window. Someone threw a bottle. The tension was electric, unpredictable, inside. Derek stood by the window, watching the crowd. "They don't even know the whole story," he muttered. Elena turned to him. "Maybe they know enough." He glared at her. "You taking their side now?" "I'm taking the side of the truth," she said, her voice calm but sharp. Chief Grant stormed in moments later, his voice booming. "Ramirez, what is going on out there? I've got the mayor on the phone demanding answers." Elena stood her ground. "We're investigating it." "Chief, you're not investigating anything," Grant snapped. "I said this stays internal. No suspensions, no press, no public statements. Do I make myself clear?" His face was flushed with anger, but beneath it was something else. Fear. Sarah watched silently from the corner. She'd seen that look before, a man protecting more than his reputation. When Grant left, Elena turned to her. "Keep digging," she said, quietly. Sarah nodded. That night, as the city lights reflected on the lake, Jamal sat at his desk, the sound of distant sirens filtering through his window. Carla's encrypted message flashed on his screen. "Grant compromised. Connection confirmed. Proceed with caution." Jamal leaned back, his mind racing. What started as one man's bias had uncovered something far bigger, a web of corruption that reached the top. Outside, the chants grew louder. The people weren't just angry, they were awake. For years, whispers of misconduct had been brushed aside, silenced by paperwork and power. But now the truth was public, visible, undeniable. And Jamal knew, as he looked out at the city glowing beneath him, that this wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The morning air inside the precinct was tense, thick with unease. Reporters had begun camping outside the main entrance, their cameras pointed at the glass doors like vultures waiting for movement. Inside, Captain Elena Ramirez sat at the head of the conference table, her hands clasped together, her eyes fixed on the folder in front of her. The blinds were drawn, muting the flashes of news cameras from across the street. On the other side of the table sat Officer Derek Sullivan, his uniform pressed, but his face pale, restless. Detective Sarah Klein and Officer Mike Jenkins stood near the wall, silent, uneasy witnesses to what was about to unfold. Elena opened the file slowly, every page inside a nail in the coffin of Derek's defense. "Officer Sullivan," she began, her tone steady but heavy. "We've reviewed the footage, witness statements, and your previous disciplinary reports. I'm giving you the chance to speak before this proceeds further." Derek leaned forward, his jaw clenched, hands gripping the table edge. "I did my job," he said sharply. "The man matched the suspect's description. I followed protocol." Sarah's voice broke the silence. "Protocol doesn't include throwing an unarmed man into the dirt because of his skin color." Derek turned toward her, his eyes narrowing. "You don't know what it's like out there," he said, voice rising. "You see a tall black man, sitting alone in a park, acting nervous." "Acting nervous?" Sarah cut him off, her tone cold. "He was reading a book. That's not suspicion, that's life." Elena held up a hand, keeping control of the room. "Enough. Let's focus on the facts." She opened another file, revealing printed screenshots from body cam footage. The timestamp showed Derek's approach, his aggressive tone, his hand on his weapon before Jamal even spoke. "You escalated before assessing," Elena said. "You initiated force against a compliant subject, and now that video has caused public unrest across the entire city." Derek exhaled hard. running a hand through his hair. So what? I'm the villain now? After 15 years on the force? After watching my father get murdered in front of me by a gang that looked just like him? His voice cracked, the bitterness raw. You think that doesn't change a man? Sarah's eyes softened, but her words didn't. It's not about what changed you. It's about what you let that pain turn you into. Mike shifted uneasily, glancing at Elena. His conscience burned. He had stayed quiet long enough. Captain, he said finally, his voice low but clear. I was there when they brought him in. I recognized the man. He's not just anyone. He's Agent Jamal Thompson, FBI. The room froze. Derek blinked, his mouth parting slightly. You're lying. Elena stared at Mike, shock flashing across her face, though she quickly masked it. You're sure? Positive, Mike said. I saw him at the federal briefing last month. I didn't say anything because... His voice faltered. Because I was afraid. Elena leaned back slowly, her mind racing. Well, she said quietly, that changes everything. Derek's face drained of color. You're telling me, he said in disbelief, that I arrested an FBI agent? Sarah nodded grimly. You didn't just arrest him. You humiliated him. On camera. In front of half the city. Derek slammed his fist against the table, the sound echoing off the walls. He never said who he was. He shouldn't have had to, Elena snapped. Your bias blinded you. You saw what you wanted to see. At that moment, the door opened. Chief Thomas Grant entered, his expression hard, his voice cutting through the tension. That's enough, he said. This meeting is over. Elena stood up slowly. With all due respect, Chief, we're handling an active internal review. You're done, Grant interrupted. All further inquiries will go through me. Sarah stepped forward. Sir, we have new evidence connecting Sullivan's disciplinary history to falsified reports signed under your authority. Grant's eyes went cold. Watch yourself. Detective, you're treading on dangerous ground. Elena crossed her arms. The ground's been dangerous for a while. Chief, we're just finally standing on it. Grant turned his glare toward Derek. Go home. Sullivan, you're on administrative leave. I'll deal with this privately. Derek rose slowly, confusion and anger colliding in his face. You're throwing me under the bus now, after everything? I'm protecting this department. Grant snapped. You've already done enough damage. Derek stormed out, the door slamming behind him, for a long moment. No one spoke. Then Sarah said quietly, He's not the only one who should be under review. Grant's eyes narrowed. You have no idea what you're implying. Elena met his gaze evenly. I think we do. After the chief left, Elena sank into her chair, the weight of truth pressing down. We need to move fast, she said, before Grant buries this. Sarah nodded. I'll pull the body cam data from storage. If there's corruption here, it's not just Sullivan, it's systemic. Meanwhile, across the city, Amanda Sullivan sat at the kitchen table, watching the morning news. Derek's face filled the screen, the viral footage replaying in slow motion. Her hands trembled as she turned up the volume. Officer Sullivan has been placed on temporary leave pending investigation, the reporter said. Amanda's heart sank. She picked up her phone, scrolling through messages, texts from friends, parents from her school, colleagues asking if the rumors were true. The shame was unbearable. When Derek walked through the door that evening, she didn't shout. She just looked at him. Tell me it's not true, she whispered. Derek dropped his keys. Exhaustion etched across his face. They twisted everything, he muttered. You don't know what really happened. Amanda shook her head, tears in her eyes. I saw the video. Derek, I saw you push that man down like he didn't matter. Her voice broke. I can't keep defending you. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. You're not the man I married. I don't know who you are anymore. Back at the precinct, Mike sat alone, staring at the city lights through the window. He thought about his son's last words before bedtime. Daddy, are the good cops winning? And the knot in his chest tightened. Tomorrow, he decided. He'd testify, not because it was easy, but because it was right. Later that night, Elena met Sarah in the records room. They worked in silence, the hum of fluorescent lights their only company. Sarah pulled a folder marked Disciplinary Archive, 2015 to 2022. Inside were pages of suppressed complaints, all with Grant's signature. He's been protecting these men for years, she said, her voice trembling with controlled fury. Elena nodded. Then tomorrow, we bring it all to light. Across town, Jamal sat with Agent Carla Ruiz in a dimly lit diner, files spread between them. Grant's been the gatekeeper, Carla said. Every time the Bureau pushed for reform, he stalled it. We couldn't see how deep it went. Jamal's eyes hardened. Now we do. As the city slept, the storm gathered strength. The truth was no longer hidden. It was knocking on every door in that precinct, waiting to be heard. And by morning, no one in Chicago would be able to pretend they didn't know what was coming. The conference room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the muffled chants from protesters echoing outside the precinct walls. Chicago's skyline glowed through the windows, a restless city caught between outrage and revelation. Inside, tension thickened the air. At the long oak table sat Captain Elena Ramirez, her jaw firm, eyes focused. Across from her sat Derek Sullivan, his face drawn, his uniform wrinkled, defiance fading into fatigue. Detective Sarah Klein flipped through her files, while Officer Mike Jenkins stood at the back, hands clasped tightly. Jamal Thompson sat beside Agent Carla Ruiz, both of them representing the side of justice that had finally arrived to confront the lies. And at the head of the table, trying to hold together the fragments of a crumbling empire, was Chief Thomas Grant. Grant's tone was sharp. Let's be clear, he said, leaning forward. This department is under scrutiny, and we need to contain this before it becomes a full-blown disaster. Officer Sullivan made a mistake. Yes, but turning this into a witch hunt will destroy us. Jamal's calm voice cut through the room like a blade. A mistake? You call that a mistake? You assaulted a federal agent in public. Chief, then you tried to bury it. Grant's eyes snapped toward him. Agent Thompson, with all due respect, you weren't identified as FBI at the scene. My officer acted on the information he had. Carla leaned forward. That argument won't hold up in court or in front of the public. You've got falsified reports, missing body cam footage, and a string of complaints you personally signed off on. This isn't one man's error. Chief, it's institutional rot. Derek slammed his palm against the table. Don't you dare talk about my department like that. You don't know what it's like on these streets. His voice cracked under the weight of his own unraveling pride. Every day we're the ones in danger, not you people sitting behind desks. Jamal's gaze didn't waver. I served 2 tours in Iraq. I've stared down men who actually wanted to kill me. And not once did I let fear dictate my judgment. You weren't in danger. Officer Sullivan, you were in control, and you abused it. The room went still. Derek's chest heaved, the anger in his eyes shifting into something else. Shame, confusion, maybe even the first glimmer of realization. He turned to Grant. You said you'd protect me, he muttered. You said if I kept my head down, it'd blow over. Grant's voice dropped to a growl. Watch what you say, officer. But it was too late. Sarah had begun recording the meeting quietly, her phone face down on the table. She leaned forward, her tone steady. Protect him from what? Chief? From accountability? From the truth? She slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents linking Derek's earlier misconduct reports to the precinct's internal corruption files. At the bottom of every page, Thomas Grant's signature. Carla opened her briefcase, pulling out another set of papers. These are from the Bureau's audit. Chief, bank transfers, false overtime reports, internal cover-ups tied to your name and Sergeant Dale Norris. It's over. Grant stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. You don't know what you're talking about, he barked. You think this city runs on honesty? You think you can keep the lights on without compromise? You live in a fantasy. Elena rose slowly. No. Chief, we've lived under your fantasy long enough. The one where power excuses corruption. Where silence equals loyalty. Her voice was firm, unshaken. That ends today. Grant's face turned red. I built this department from nothing. I gave this city order when no one else would. Jamal leaned forward, his voice low, deliberate. You didn't build order. You built fear, and people like you hid behind it while good officers paid the price. Outside. The chants grew louder, dozens of voices blending into one unified roar. The sound pressed against the glass like a heartbeat. Justice, justice, justice. Derek's composure finally cracked. I just wanted to serve, he said quietly, his hands trembling. I didn't mean for it to go this far. He turned toward Jamal, his voice breaking. You have to believe me. I didn't know who you were. Jamal looked at him, his expression calm but resolute. You didn't need to know who I was to treat me like a human being. Derek's shoulders sagged, the last of his arrogance fading into exhaustion. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Elena reached for the suspension notice in front of her. Officer Derek Sullivan, she said clearly, you are hereby terminated from the Chicago Police Department. Effective immediately. You will surrender your badge and firearm before leaving this building. The words landed like a final verdict. Derek's eyes darted toward Grant, searching for backup that never came. Grant said nothing, only stared at the table, defeated. Slowly. Derek reached into his pocket, removed his badge, and placed it on the table. The small metallic sound echoed through the room like the closing of a door. Mike stepped forward hesitantly. Captain, he said softly, there's something else you should know. He turned toward Derek, then back to Elena. When this happened, I knew who he was. I recognized Agent Thompson, but I stayed quiet. I was scared for my job, for my kids. His voice cracked. I was wrong. Elena looked at him with quiet empathy. It takes courage to admit that now. Officer Jenkins, your honesty will be noted. Grant finally looked up, rage simmering beneath his polished exterior. You think you can turn my officers against me? You think this little show changes anything? You're finished. Ramirez, every one of you. Carla stood. Actually, Chief, the FBI has already issued a warrant. You're under investigation for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to conceal misconduct. As of this moment, you're relieved of command. Grant froze. You don't have the authority. Two federal agents entered the room, stepping beside Carla. One of them produced a document, placing it firmly in front of Grant. You might want to read this carefully, sir. The color drained from Grant's face as he scanned the paper. You can't do this, he whispered. You can't. Elena's voice softened, almost sorrowful. You did this to yourself. Grant was escorted out, silent, head low. As the door closed, the weight in the room shifted. The storm that had been building for weeks had finally broken. Outside, the crowd's roar reached a crescendo. Reporters shouted questions. Protesters held signs high in the air. Word spread like wildfire. Chief Grant arrested. Officer Sullivan terminated. FBI involvement confirmed. Inside. Jamal stood, adjusting his jacket. "It's not over," he said quietly. "This is just one precinct. There are more like it." Elena nodded. "Then we keep going." Carla gathered her files, her voice steady. "The Bureau will announce the investigation publicly tomorrow. But for tonight, this city knows one thing. Truth can't be silenced forever." As Jamal walked toward the window, the city lights reflected across his face. The same park where it all began was visible in the distance. Grant Park. Peaceful now, unaware it had become the spark of something larger. He closed his eyes, hearing his brother's voice in memory. Soft but strong. "Don't stop until it means something." Jamal opened his eyes again, watching the crowd outside. "It means something now," he whispered, and as the night pressed on, the city that once turned away from its own reflection finally began to face it. The city moved on, but for those who lived through it, nothing was the same again. 3 months after that fateful meeting, the storm had calmed on the surface, yet beneath it, consequences rippled like waves against the concrete shores of Chicago. Derek Sullivan sat alone in his small apartment, the air thick with silence. The walls were bare except for a faded photo of his family on the mantel. His badge was gone, his name stripped from the precinct roster. Outside, life went on. Sirens, laughter, the distant hum of traffic. But inside that apartment, time had stopped. His marriage was over. Amanda had filed for divorce 2 weeks after his termination, citing emotional cruelty and neglect. She took the kids, the car, and what was left of her trust. The court granted her full custody. Derek didn't fight it. He didn't have the strength. The once proud officer had become a ghost of himself. Each morning, he stared into the mirror, barely recognizing the man looking back. His eyes, once sharp and alert, now carried the dull glaze of regret. The bottle had become his closest companion. Cheap whiskey that dulled the ache but sharpened the shame. He'd tried attending support meetings for ex-police officers, but word spread quickly. No one wanted to sit beside the man who'd become a national symbol of racial bias. Even the community outreach group he'd tried joining, a program called Voices for Change, rejected his application after public backlash. They sent a polite email. "We believe your involvement may distract from our mission." He read that line over and over until the words blurred. Across town, life had taken a different path for others. Captain Elena Ramirez was now leading the newly formed Community Oversight Division, a unit created to ensure accountability within the police department. The changes weren't just cosmetic. They were structural. Every case of misconduct now went through an independent board. Every complaint reviewed without internal interference. It was a start, not a solution, but a beginning nonetheless. Elena knew real change didn't come from policies alone. It came from people willing to face truth over comfort. She carried that belief like a shield, even when pushback came from city officials who preferred silence to progress. Detective Sarah Klein had been promoted to lead investigator for internal affairs. Her work uncovered more than anyone expected. Layers of falsified reports, years of buried complaints, and names of officers long protected by privilege and politics. She worked late nights, often sitting in the same dim room where Derek once defended himself, sifting through the rot of a system she once trusted. For her, it wasn't vengeance. It was redemption. She'd lived through abuse, silence, and fear in her own life, and now she had the power to ensure others wouldn't be ignored the same way. Officer Mike Jenkins, the young father who once stayed silent out of fear, found himself speaking at training academies about integrity and courage. His testimony during Derek's disciplinary hearing had changed everything. It wasn't dramatic, but it was honest. "Silence is easy," he told recruits, "but it kills your soul a little at a time." His courage earned him quiet respect among peers who once dismissed him as timid. His kids didn't understand it all, but they understood enough. When his son asked one night, "Daddy, are the good cops winning now?" Mike smiled and said softly, "We're trying. Son, we're trying." Meanwhile, Chief Thomas Grant's downfall was complete. The FBI's investigation found proof of obstruction, conspiracy, and evidence tampering. Grant was indicted on multiple charges, his assets frozen, his reputation shattered. The trial became a national spectacle. Grant sat in court each day, pale and silent, as former allies testified against him. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, he didn't flinch. The man who once ruled the precinct with iron authority now faced 5 years in federal prison. His final statement to the judge was brief. "I thought I was protecting the department. I see now I was protecting myself." And Jamal Thompson, agent, veteran, and survivor, returned to his work with quiet purpose. The Bureau had offered him extended leave, but he refused. He believed in finishing what he started. His investigation into the corruption ring expanded beyond Chicago, uncovering ties to precincts in neighboring states. For Jamal, justice wasn't about revenge. It was about exposure, about truth, about giving people the chance to choose what kind of system they wanted to live under. Yet privately, he carried scars no one could see. At night, he still woke from dreams of Grant Park, the grass beneath him, the cold click of handcuffs, Derek's voice echoing in his ears. He'd tell himself it was over, but deep down, he knew the fight for equality never really ended. It just changed battlegrounds. One evening, while reviewing files in his office, Carla Ruiz stopped by. "You ever stop to breathe?" she teased lightly, setting down 2 cups of coffee. Jamal looked up and smiled faintly. "If I stop, I'll start thinking," he replied. She nodded, understanding too well. "You did good work. Jamal, what happened here? It mattered." He looked out the window, where the city lights shimmered across the river. "I just hope it doesn't fade once the cameras stop rolling," he said. Carla smiled softly. "Change never happens fast, but this time, it started with truth, and that's something no one can erase." Across the city, Derek sat in his dark apartment, the same news playing on his TV. Grant's conviction, Elena's reforms, Jamal's name mentioned with respect. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had once believed he was defending order, and now he was the face of everything that needed to change. He took another sip of whiskey, then stopped halfway. He set the bottle down, staring at the photo of his children on the table, their smiles, bright, innocent, untainted by his failures, cut through the fog in his mind. For the first time in months, he felt something different. Not anger, not self-pity, just the weight of truth. He grabbed a notebook and pen from the drawer. The first page was blank. He stared at it for a long time before writing, in uneven letters. "To my kids, and to the people I hurt." The words came slowly at first, then flowed like confession. He wrote about fear, about pride, about how hate disguises itself as duty. He wrote about the day he cuffed a man he now realized had been the embodiment of everything he should have respected. He wrote about Grant, the promises, the lies, the way the system chewed them all up, and as he wrote, something inside him began to shift, a small, painful kind of awakening. By midnight, the pages were filled. He closed the notebook, set down the pen, and sat back. For the first time in a long time, he didn't reach for the bottle. He didn't look for excuses. He just sat in silence, listening to the faint hum of the city beyond his window. Somewhere out there, Jamal was still fighting for justice. Somewhere. Elena and Sarah were rebuilding what men like Grant had destroyed. And for the first time, Derek understood. He could never undo the damage. But maybe, if he was brave enough, he could start by facing it. Outside. The city lights shimmered in the winter night. The same city that had witnessed humiliation, corruption, and outrage now glowed with quiet resolve. Chicago wasn't healed. It wasn't perfect. But it was learning. And somewhere in that fragile progress, in the reforms, in the confessions, in the courage to tell the truth, there was hope that the next generation would inherit a city better than the one their fathers had left behind. 3 months later, everything had changed, not through speeches or politics, but through choices. Hard, honest choices. Jamal Thompson returned to work at the Bureau, quieter but more resolute than ever. He had faced humiliation, anger, and exposure. Yet what he carried now was purpose. His report on the corruption ring was complete, leading to multiple arrests and forced retirements. He had done what he set out to do, shine light where darkness lived. But even with that victory, he never spoke of himself as a hero. When younger agents called him brave, he simply said, "Justice isn't bravery, it's responsibility." Those words spread quietly through his office, and soon, people began repeating them like a truth they had forgotten. At the precinct, Captain Elena Ramirez led her new oversight division with the same firmness she had shown from the start. Every case of misconduct went through external review. Every report verified twice. Every officer reminded that the badge was not armor against accountability. She no longer feared confrontation with city officials. She welcomed it. When a council member warned her that reform might hurt morale, she replied calmly, "If the truth hurts morale, then maybe morale was built on the wrong foundation." Her leadership became the model for others. Strong, disciplined, guided by integrity rather than fear. Detective Sarah Klein found herself leading a team of younger officers who admired her directness. She had seen what silence cost and refused to repeat that mistake. Her work uncovered years of buried cases, and for each one reopened, she felt a small piece of the past put right, in private moments. She thought about how she used to survive by keeping her head down. Now, she taught others the opposite. Speak, act, stand. Courage isn't loud, she told them. It's consistent. Officer Mike Jenkins had changed, too. His name became known in community meetings as the officer who spoke the truth when it mattered. Parents shook his hand. Children waved when he patrolled their block. He didn't see himself as a symbol, but to many, he was proof that good men still existed behind the badge. When a young recruit asked him why he came forward, he said quietly, "Because my kids are watching, and I want them to know their father did the right thing, even when it cost him." Lisa Patel, the woman who filmed the arrest, continued her quiet life, though it would never be ordinary again. She had faced fear, harassment, and pressure. But she never deleted the video that changed everything. When asked if she regretted posting it, she answered, "Truth doesn't need permission." That sentence became the title of a small documentary filmed about her act, and schools began showing it during civic awareness classes. Robert Hayes, the retired cop, spent his time volunteering at the New Police Community Dialogue program. He spoke openly about his own years of silence, urging younger officers to remember that loyalty to the badge should never mean loyalty to wrongdoing. His voice, once defensive, now carried humility. "We can't fix what we deny," he told them, "but we can start by admitting it." Even Chief Thomas Grant's downfall carried lessons. His conviction had sent a message across the nation. Cover-ups and favoritism were no longer hidden crimes. The department began rebuilding trust, one case at a time, not through press releases, but through transparency. No one called it perfect, but no one could call it blind anymore. As for Derek Sullivan, the man whose arrogance once lit the fuse, his days were quiet. He no longer wore a badge or carried a weapon. He lived alone, worked part-time doing maintenance at a small repair shop, and spent his evenings writing. The journal he started out of guilt became a habit of reflection. His latest entry read, "I spent my life confusing fear for duty. The hardest truth is realizing I was never protecting others. I was protecting myself." He mailed a copy of that page to an organization helping former officers confront bias, asking them to use it if it could help anyone avoid his mistakes. They accepted it, and later invited him to speak anonymously to new recruits about accountability. He didn't expect forgiveness, only the chance to prevent another version of himself from forming. One afternoon, Jamal received a letter with no return name, just a page torn from a notebook. The handwriting was rough but sincere. It read, "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know I understand now. I see the man I hurt, not just the badge he wore. Thank you for not responding with hate." Jamal folded the paper, placed it in his drawer, and never spoke of it again. The city moved differently after that. Meetings between police and citizens grew less confrontational, more constructive. Schools began teaching communication workshops with officers. Community centers reopened under new funding, and younger recruits learned about accountability before learning about authority. Elena once said, "Justice is a long road, not a moment." And Chicago had begun walking it, slowly, unevenly, but forward. In his final internal memo before taking a brief leave, Jamal wrote a single paragraph addressed to his team. "The world doesn't need perfect officers, lawyers, or agents. It needs honest ones. Truth doesn't always come easy, but if we keep showing up for it, it will outlive us. That's all the justice we can ever hope for." He closed his laptop, stood from his desk, and left the office without ceremony. No applause, no cameras, no speeches, just quiet resolve. For the first time in years, he felt peace. Not because the world was fixed, but because people had stopped pretending it couldn't be. Justice had begun to move again, not in headlines or courtrooms, but in hearts that had finally decided to listen. Thank you so much for watching this story. If it moved you, please take a moment to hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in justice and humanity. Your support keeps these true, powerful stories alive.